The second part of the internal audit process is the audit process, the execution of the strategic and annual planning by having a compliance, management, and operations audit. Audit process is divided into four: audit engagement planning, audit execution, audit reporting, audit follow-up. The process is applicable to both management and operations audit. Each process is critical to ensure successful internal audit engagement. Audit engagement planning. An audit requires good planning. Planning entails familiarization with the objectives, processes, risks, and control of the auditee and activity to be audited, and developing a strategy and approach in conducting the audit. It is the most important part of the audit, as the success of an audit depends on how well it has been planned. There are 8 phases in audit engagement planning. The first is the creation of audit team, documentation, determination for an individual audit, audit methodology, resources and targets, audit engagement plan, having a key performance indicators, and then the approval of the audit engagement plan and KPI by the EAS head and the local chief executive. We will discuss them one by one. The creation of internal audit team for the audit engagement. In conducting the internal audit, compliance, management, and operations audit, the ES shall form a team to formally start the process. The ES shall issue an office order for the creation of such team. But before we create an internal audit team, we have to be reminded what to audit. First is to understand the program, projects, systems, and process. Then determine the audit objective, scope, criteria, and evidence. Now we have to develop the audit plan, then determine the KPI, performance indicators, and then determine the resources required for the audit. As we move forward, documentation to approval. In the documentation of the understanding of the LGU's program, project, systems, process, audit engagement planning starts from an understanding of the organizational mandate and focusing on what areas will be audited. It involves the selection of a specific internal controls and focusing on a degree of compliance with laws, regulations, and policies applicable to the specific program, project, systems, process for evaluation. Evaluation of the control effectiveness and determination of whether or not operations are conducted economically, efficiently, ethically, and effectively. Next is the determination of the audit objectives, scope, criteria, and audit evidence. Individual audits within a particular audit plan should be based on defined audit objectives, scope, and criteria. They should be consistent with the overall audit plan objectives. Audit objectives based on the information gathered and analyzed during the understanding of the agency, program, and project. The objective and the scope of the audit can be defined. An audit objective is what the audit aims to accomplish. Audit objectives also relate to why the audit is being conducted. The audit scope, which is the framework or limits of the audit, is determined after the audit objective have been identified. It should be consistent with the audit plan and audit objectives. The audit scope includes the time frame, locations, a major process, operating systems, support systems, or key controls that will be covered by the audit to achieve audit objectives. The audit criteria are reasonable standards against which existing conditions are assessed. They reflect a normative condition for the subject of the audit. Audit methodology depends on the defined audit objectives, scope, criteria, and audit evidence, as well as duration and location of the audit. It is a general statement describing the activities that will be undertaken in conducting the audit, and generally involves on-site audit methods and remote auditing methods, which take into account the extent of involvement between the auditor and the auditee. Careful planning involves the determination of the overall resource requirements to accomplish the planned audits. This involves assessing the current staff capability, capacity, technological resources, financial resources, among others. Target and milestones, or the dates for the completion of accomplishment of critical elements during the audit process, should be established to keep the track of the progress of the engagement and check on the quality of the outputs. An, an audit engagement plan must be developed and documented for each audit engagement. The audit plan summarizes the background information collected from the auditee, such as the organization's mandate, objectives, strategies, operating and support systems, manual of operations, flowcharts, narrative notes, relevant laws, rules, and regulations, together with organizational performance and previous audit. The audit plan outlines objectives, scope, criteria, and methodology to be adopted in the. It also indicates the timing and resource allocation. So as you can see here, this is the component of the audit engagement plan: introduction, audit objectives, audit scope, audit criteria, audit methodology, resources and inputs, as well as the information that you needed. So we move forward with the determination of KPIs, or key performance indicators. So the audit engagement KPIs are performance measures that are utilized to assess the outputs contributing to the overall organizational efficiency and effectiveness. The approval of the engagement plan and KPIs, this is the last part, it is very important. The audit engagement plan and KPIs are submitted by the internal audit team leader to the ES head for review and approval prior to the audit execution. The ES head will evaluate the documents to assess the relevance, significance, auditability, and other factors affecting the conduct of audit. It is also important that the audit engagement plan and KPIs are approved by the local chief executive. Audit process, the audit execution phase. The audit execution involves the conduct of audit techniques, tools, and procedures as listed down in the audit engagement plan. This is to gather and evaluate the presence of internal controls, identify the gaps and deficiencies, and gather sufficient data and evidence as basis and support in the internal audit report. If the gaps and deficiencies warrant immediate resolution of the management, it shall rely upon ES and shall be discussed with the LCE and the concerned. So how to conduct audit? First is to entrance conference, then conduct compliance audit, wherein you gather and analyze evidence, compare the quotations with criteria, determine the probable cause through root cause analysis, then prepare working papers. Then followed by conduct systems or process audit, or the operations and management audit, wherein you gather and analyze evidence, you compare the conditions with the criteria, and then determine the root causes. So we could use the 5 whys or fishbone diagram, and then prepare working papers. So the end of the execution phase is having the exit conference wherein you discuss the audit findings. We will discuss them one by one. Entrance conference. Execution of the audit is initiated with an entry conference. First is to confirm the agreement of all participants to the audit plan. Second is to introduce the audit team and the roles. Third is ensure that all planned audit activities included in the audit plan can be performed. And the inter-conference sets the tone of the audit. The initial meeting with the auditee aims to discuss the plans for the conduct of the audit, as well as to obtain their views and expectations on the overall framework of the audit. The conduct of compliance audit. Compliance audit is the evaluation of the degree of compliance of control with laws, regulations, managerial policies, systems, processes of government, including compliance with accountability measures, ethical standards, and contractual obligations. It also covers the determination of whether or not all internal control components are well designed and properly implemented. The conduct of system or process audit. Operations audit is designed to evaluate the effectiveness, efficiency, ethicality, and economy of the operating system selected for audit. On the other hand, management audit aims to evaluate control effectiveness. This step involves the documentation of the process or system under audit, identification of the control procedures, verification and validation, or whether or not such control procedures are compliant with and are working effectively. Next is gathering and analysis of evidence. Under the execution phase of the audit engagement plan is executed to gather more evidence and draw the audit findings. Audit evidence covers all information used by the auditor in arriving the audit findings and audit report. And lastly, exit conference. The purpose of the exit conference is to discuss the highlights of the audit findings with the auditee and or responsible official who has sufficient knowledge about the audit area. It also provides an opportunity to get the auditee comments, management comments, and insights about the significant audit issues as a way of validating the audit findings. Management comments should be taken into consideration so as to arrive at workable recommendations and obtain the auditee's commitment toward performing remedial actions as a manifestation of progressive attitude towards the audit findings. The auditee's comments, responses, are recorded in the audit finding sheets and integrated into the draft report. Audit reporting. The internal audit report shall be communicated with the local chief executive. The internal audit report shall be accurate, factual, objective, clear, complete, and timely reported. The report shall include the background information, the audit objectives, scope, approach, observation findings, conclusions, recommendations, and agreed management actions. The recommendation should add value to the LGU and can be implemented. But as a reminder, in reporting, so what and how to report. So first is develop audit findings. So we develop audit findings through 4 C's. Criteria based on laws, rules, and regulation standards. We match it with the conditions and what is the findings of the facts. And then we will draw conclusions based on the facts, conclusion of facts. And then we'll have to conduct root cause analysis to identify what is the cause or the probable cause. And then it is important to develop audit recommendations, preventive and corrective actions. We will discuss them one by one. Development of audit findings. Audit findings can be developed by analyzing the pieces of evidence gathered for each of the audit elements. Evidence may be categorized as physical, documentary, testimonial, analytical, or electronic. Evidence should be sufficient and appropriate, substantial, competent, and relevant. Audit findings provide answers to the audit objectives. Audit findings compare the conditions, the factual and evidentiary conditions such as the current state or practices, or what is obtaining and their effects, with the audit criteria and determine the causes of non-compliance. Once an audit finding has been identified, 2 complementary forms of assessment take place. First is the assessment of significance of the findings, and the second is the determination of probable cause and the root causes. In fine, all audit findings should be formulated based on 4 C's: criteria, condition, conclusion, cause. They defined as follows: criteria, the standards against which the condition is compared with laws, rules, regulations, policies, or orders, guidelines, procedures, plans, targets, and contractual obligations. On the other hand, condition, a fact supported by substantial evidence. The condition refers to what is currently being done or the current situation. This is also referred to as findings of facts, followed by conclusion, the evaluation of the criteria and the conditions to determine 1. The degree of compliance or non-compliance of control with laws, regulations, and policies. 2. The control effectiveness or ineffectiveness. 3. The efficiency, effectiveness, ethicality, economy of agency operations. And lastly is the cause, the immediate and proximate reason for the condition for which substantial evidence will be used as basis of the audit recommendation. It may also refer to the probable cause, which needs only to rest on evidence showing that more likely than not that act or omission of the person responsible had caused the non-compliance, which may warrant the conduct of administrative proceeding by the disciplining authority in case of compliance audit, and the root cause in case of management and operations audit. In the development of audit recommendations, Much of the work of internal audit is judged on the quality of final audit report, including its analysis, findings, and recommendations. The recommendations, in particular, provide course of action as the basis for improving internal controls. Workable recommendations are clear, based on science of facts, conditions, and evidence on the practicable, incontestable, unworkable solutions that can stand alone and address the issues at hand. Audit recommendations are management, legal remedies to avoid occurrence, preventive action, and avoid recurrence, corrective action of control weaknesses and incidences. In preparation of draft audit report, the draft audit report is prepared by laying out and analyzing the pieces of evidence gathered to arrive the preliminary audit findings and recommendation. It should provide a complete, accurate, concise, and clear record of the audit. When preparing a draft audit report, the auditor should delineate the objective and scope and report with scope unless other issues of substance are identified. B. Identify all criteria. C. Report significant matters, positive or negative. D. Describe the context and background of the reported matter only as far as is necessary to provide an understanding of the issue. E. State the initial findings, management comments, and team's rejoinder, if any. F. Present the audit findings in a manner that is concise, fair, and objective. And lastly, state the recommendations so that they indicate what needs to be done, but not how to do it. In updating the LCE should be updated on the results of the audit engagement. At the same time, they should have a copy of the initial findings and then the draft report, as well as the approved recommendations. In preparation of the final audit report, the draft report may then be finalized integrating the following as parts of the final report: table of contents, executive summary, detailed audit findings, management comments and team's rejoinder, monitoring and feedback of prior year's recommendations, and appendices. The final audit report should be presented to the LCE or the presiding officer of the Sangguniang, who decides on the distribution of the audit report based on the recommendation of IAS head. Audit follow-up. Audit follow-up is a monitoring and feedback activity undertaken to ensure the extent and adequacy of preventive corrective actions taken by the management to address inadequacies identified during the audit. The objective is to increase the probability that recommendations will be implemented. In audit follow-up, we need to understand what to follow up. First is to monitor implementation of approved audit findings and recommendations. Second is to resolve non-implementation, inadequate implementation of audit recommendations. Third is prepare audit follow-up report. So what are these audit follow-up? First is the monitoring of the implementation of approved audit findings and recommendations. It is sound practice to monitor the implementation of approved recommendation, management, or legal remedies to avoid the occurrence, preventive measures, and recurrence as corrective measures of control, weaknesses, incidences after a reasonable period from the report submission date. The benefits of internal audit report recommendations are reduced and deficiencies remain if recommendations are not implemented within the specified time frame. In the resolution of the non-implementation or inadequate implementation of audit recommendations, in the event of non-implementation of recommendation or inadequate action of the auditee or the process owners, the ES recommends appropriate legal and or management remedies for non-implementation of recommendations and inadequate preventive corrective actions. And lastly, in the preparation of audit follow-up report, the reasons of the lack of action or non-completion of action on any recommendation and further action considered on significant recommendations that have not been acted upon should be documented. Where possible, the report should describe the results of the auditor's analysis of actual and against project benefits for the period under review, summarize the extent of the implementation of the approved recommendations, highlight cases where the auditor's performance in implementing recommendations have been particularly inadequate, and describe the actions, if any, that the auditor intend to take in relation to inadequate auditees' actions.